The job of a law enforcement officer is difficult at best, and hundreds of officers lose their lives in the line of duty every year. This graph shows just the lives lost due to gunfire. Pre the summer of Floyd, it was in the 50s, and post-2020, in the mid-60s. And we're on pace for close to 60 as well this year. But hundreds of officers are also shot every year. In fact, on average, over one officer is struck by gunfire every day. Let's take a look at some recent incidents of officers shot in the line of duty. And we're going to start in Houston, Texas, where I don't have the name of either the suspect or the officer. An officer was grazed in the arm when a suspect opened fire in southwest Houston. On Thursday at about 12:44, police received an anonymous call about a suspicious person with a weapon in an apartment complex. When officers arrived at the scene, no one met them, so they began searching the area when they received another call that someone had been firing a gun. When officers approached the apartment that the first caller told them about, a large dog approached the door and began barking before the officers knocked. Right after the barking, the door opened, the suspect appeared in the doorway with a handgun, and it appears fired one time at the officer. The officer returned fire several times as he moved into position of cover. Officers began giving voice commands, and within a minute, the suspect came out of the apartment, dropped the gun, and surrendered. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, what was the point of this? The officers come to the door, the dog alerts the guy that the officers are there, and he just starts shooting, and then a couple minutes later walks out and puts the gun down. Now, no officer died in this, so he didn't kill anybody, but this dude could have easily gone to jail over this if he's going to go to jail either way, but he could have gone to jail for a long time if he'd have killed one of these officers. And then he just comes out and puts the gun down, so it's not like he was even putting up a fight. Some of this stuff just doesn't even make sense that these guys do. Okay, so this one, Denham Springs, Louisiana. We have an adult male suspect, Justin Roberts. He's 30 years old. Let's see what he did. The shooting took place sometime after 4 p.m. in the parking lot outside of Big Lots, Petco, and Office Depot. During the disturbance, when they got here to investigate the disturbance, the suspect started firing on them with a firearm. Our officers returned fire, and one of my officers is in critical condition at the hospital. That's from the chief of police. And I have pictures of these guys. I have pictures of the officer and the suspect on this one. Police have identified the suspect as 30-year-old Justin Roberts and confirmed that Roberts died from his injuries at the hospital. Officials stated the suspect was still shooting when he fled the scene in a vehicle and traveled down 190 on South Range Avenue. Roberts was later shot by Livingston Parish deputies near the Albertsons. And court records show that this dude, well, you can see by the picture, his picture's a mugshot. So this isn't the first time this guy's been in contact with law enforcement. And this time was just the last. You can't just start opening fire on police officers and expect them not to shoot back. So that guy, unfortunately, learned the hard way that you can't shoot at police. All right, this next one's in Coram, New York. And all I got is it's an adult male. I don't have a name on this guy. A Suffolk County officer who was part of a surveillance team was shot and wounded Thursday afternoon in Coram. Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harris says officers were conducting surveillance outside of a home with a robbery suspect inside around 1 p.m. He says that when the suspect noticed the officers, he began to flee. An officer then exited his vehicle and pursued him. The officer demanded the suspect stop, but the suspect did not comply and fired 2 rounds at the officer. Harrison says the officer was hit once in the upper right thigh. Other officers at the scene came to his aid and applied 2 tourniquets to the wound. which doctors say stopped him from bleeding out. The wounded officer was rushed to the hospital where he's in stable condition but will likely require surgery. Harrison said officers at the scene had a 20-minute standoff with the suspect, identified as Janelle Funder with an F, Burke, who eventually came out voluntarily and was arrested without further incident. So this is another one where these guys are just opening fire on the police. And I'm not sure Janelle, Janell, it sounds like a girl's name. But they're not saying, oh, wait, here we go. The suspect is a known Bloods gang member and has one prior arrest for weapons possession in August. He had a gun in the car. It doesn't say if it's a guy or a girl. I'm assuming it's a guy, but his name's Janelle, which is a little on the odd side for a guy. Maybe not. I don't know. All right. Anyway, let's move on to Lakeland, Florida. And here we got we got a prepubescent suspect in this one that ended up getting injured by the police after injuring a police officer. So we'll see what he did. A Lakeland police officer and a 13-year-old were injured after exchanging gunfire in a chase Wednesday evening. At around 5:16 p.m., Officer Smith heard gunshots and responded to a drive-by shooting. Smith arrived to find a 13-year-old boy and a 14-year-old boy getting into a car driven by a 19-year-old, Jermaine Julian. Sheriff Grady Judd, love that dude, said during a news conference. After a brief chase, Judd said, all three teens got out of the car and ran, letting the vehicle roll into traffic and sideswipe another car. That's when Officer Smith ran after the 13-year-old who was refusing orders to put down his gun. Judd said that they entered the Carrington Place apartment complex, where the teen can be seen on body camera video turning around and firing at an officer and hitting the officer in the left foot. As the chase continued, authorities said the officer returned fire, shooting the 13-year-old in the thigh and stomach. The 13-year-old was transported to the hospital, where he remains under police supervision. So, according to Judd, the 19-year-old driving the car and the 14-year-old, who was also armed, have both been arrested. The sheriff said the teens obtained the guns by breaking into cars and stealing them. So you got these little kids, out doing this stuff, and they don't have the same, a lot of these criminals, the adults are just shooting at police and not thinking anything of it. But these younger kids seem to at a higher rate where they just open fire on the police like it doesn't matter. Like the police don't matter, like their lives don't matter, like nothing matters. And that's got to be fairly difficult for police to deal with when you're constantly dealing with people that just don't care. So let's go to Woodlawn, Illinois. Okay, this is another suspect that ended up getting killed. Brandon L. Griffin, he's 23 years old, and he ended up getting shot and killed. An Albuquerque man died after he exchanged gunfire with Illinois State Police on the shoulder of the interstate. 23-year-old Brandon Griffin died at the scene. An officer saw a stranded vehicle on the right shoulder of the interstate around 3 a.m. and stopped to help. Two officers with the department were at the scene when an altercation happened between one of the officers and Griffin. The injured state officer was taken to the regional hospital for a gunshot wound. Griffin had a warrant out for his arrest after failing to appear in court. He was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon and shooting at or from a vehicle. Griffin was caught driving onto a man's property in Lincoln County by the property owner and shot towards them, according to court records. A female passenger in the vehicle with Griffin was uninjured, along with the other officer. So this is one of those things that they're just shooting at these cops, and then they're getting shot at back. And then they end up, a lot of times, this guy ends up getting killed. They end up getting killed. And you got to wonder if some of these people, hear people talk about that suicide by cop thing. And a lot of these times you have to figure some of this is suicide by cop because, these guys are really stupid anyway, but some of this, it almost has to be that they're not going to get taken in. And so they just keep doing what they're doing until they end up getting injured enough or killed that, they have to stop. So here's another, Ravanel, South Carolina, where the deputy Evan Cubbage, he's 36 years old, he was injured, and our suspect James Rakeem Pierce, he's 28, and he was killed. James Rakeem Pierce. Context clues. Okay, a Charleston County deputy is recovering after authorities say a Sunday traffic stop turned into a deadly exchange of gunfire. It happened at 3:45 p.m. Deputy Evan Cubbage, who has been with the sheriff's office for 3 years, conducted a traffic stop. After a brief interaction with the two people in the car, Cubbage called for backup. And Sheriff Kristen Graziano, oh, that's what she said. Once a second deputy arrived, Graziano said the passenger opened fire, striking Cubbage 3 times. Then both deputies returned fire, killing the passenger. Spokesman said Cubbage was taken to the hospital with serious injuries, but he was released from the hospital. So this cop calls for a backup, and when the backup arrives, the dude in the car for this traffic stop just opens fire on them. I mean, cops have to be on alert at all times. There is no point in their daily job that they're on duty that they can be not on alert. Because all these guys, all of these incidents that I've read so far, they've all been like kind of, I mean, not things that you're like going into it thinking, I'm going to get shot at. So let's go to Port Deposit, Maryland, where we got 3 officers that were all injured by gunfire. And we got the suspect, 23-year-old Daniel Padraig Colin Donnelly. He's got a lot of names. He was unharmed and he was arrested. Police say just before midnight on Saturday, the sheriff's office received a 911 call from a person reporting a burglary in progress. 4 sheriff deputies and 1 trooper responded. Okay, so a lot of people responded to this. Police say 2 of the deputies and the trooper entered the backyard of the property when they were struck by shots fired by the suspect. The suspect fled into a nearby woodline. No shots were fired by the deputies or troopers on the scene. Then just before 4 a.m., police received a phone call reporting a suspicious man at a convenience store approximately 3/4 of a mile away. Police say troopers and other law enforcement officers responded to the scene and made contact with the suspect, later identified as Donnelly. Donnelly was placed in police custody and transported to Northeast Barrack. So these guys, look, they're checking out this burglary, and this dude, it doesn't say if he was the burglar, but assuming he was, they're checking out a burglary, and this guy just opens fire on them when they come into the backyard. Again, there is not a moment where these guys, can like just even take a breath. They have to be on high alert at all times. Okay, Wichita Falls, Texas. Law enforcement was injured and another suspect that was killed. Wow, I should have been counting because it seems like there's a lot of them that have been killed this time. Okay, we got Anthony Scott Nelon. He's 45 years old and he was fatally shot. According to a press release, the Archer County Sheriff's Office responded to a call that turned into a pursuit with Anthony Scott Nelon of Early, Texas. Nelon stopped on Old something road near Hatton Road and a standoff ensued. Multiple agencies, including Texas DPS, were involved in the standoff. Shots were fired during the standoff, which injured a trooper and resulted in Nelon's death. Okay, you got all these cops out there and you're in a shootout with them. I mean, this is another one that goes back to, is it suicide by cop or is the guy just stupid? Because if you're one guy with one gun, you have a limited amount of bullets. And you have multiple cops that you're shooting at that probably have more bullets on them, maybe not, but probably have more bullets on them than you do between the group of them. Okay, so let's go to... Oh, this is the last one. Okay, let's go to Oxford, North Carolina. We have a law enforcement officer named Corporal Daniel Allen, and the suspect, again, another suspect that was killed. Suspect James Newton. It doesn't say how old he is other than he was an adult. A standoff that began Friday night and extended into Saturday morning between a barricaded Oxford man and law enforcement officer ended when the shooting suspect was found dead. A police officer and a canine were both shot. Aw, puppy. And several police vehicles sustained damage from gunfire before the ordeal ended. The suspect, who the commissioner identified as Jason Newton, reportedly vowed not to be taken alive. Okay, so this one could be argued as suicide by cop. A police officer was shot Friday evening about 6:20 p.m. in Oxford. Allen, a 5-year veteran of the force, was wounded when responding to a disturbance call on Prospect Avenue. When Allen got there and was getting out of his vehicle, he was met by a rapid succession of gunfire. Second officer arrived and was also met with gunfire, but she was not injured. During the incident, Newton continued to shoot at police striking vehicles, striking them numerous times. Canine Halligan was shot multiple times while inside a vehicle. Newton then barricaded himself inside the residence and refused to communicate. The standoff at the home continued into the early morning hours. It ended when Durham County Sheriff's and Raleigh's Police Department special units determined that Newton was inside the home dead from what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So this guy, he ends up shooting an officer as well as a canine and shooting a whole bunch just because he wanted to die. So he wants to go out in some kind of blaze of glory. So he opens fire on all these guys and shoots a poor little innocent puppy canine in the back of a police vehicle who was doing absolutely nothing. I like the canines. So, but this is what the cops, you can see how dangerous this is. And you can see that this was just from the last week. And there was probably a dozen incidents here from just the last week of officers being shot in the line of duty. And it literally happens. I think I did the math on it this year. We're averaging 1.28 per day. So like 1.25. I know that sounds funny, like a quarter of a thing, but so, an extra one every 4 days. But these guys, they're opening fire, and the police they haven't even engaged with them on half of these ones that I just went through. They hadn't even engaged with the person, and the person opens fire on them, like just right on sight. They open fire. There's no communication, nothing. They see them and they start shooting. And they shoot poor little canines sitting in the back seat of police vehicles. Defenseless canines. Anyway, well, that's all I got for you today. I'm going to try and do these officer-involved shooting ones on kind of a regular basis because I think we need to bring a little more awareness to just how tough the job of a police officer is and just how dangerous it is. I think a lot of people in our country have lost sight of that, and doubtful any of them will be watching this channel or watching any of these videos, but maybe somebody will that can pass the news along to them that what these officers face is very difficult and very dangerous, and they're shot at for traffic stops, for every call. They could be shot at any moment while they were on duty, and they wanted to fund them, and now they want to refund them and get them back because they realize that doesn't work. Well, you got to show them some appreciation because, I got pulled over a couple months ago, and I actually thanked the cop for his service when he pulled me over for speeding. I was like, thank you for your service, because you know what? We got to thank them for their service. So anyway, I'm going to try and do these on a regular basis, so I hope you like them, and I'll catch you on the next one.